I heard this podcast the other day. The thing is 18 minutes long, and this person is doing some sort of 5-day challenge to add email subscribers. And she spent the first minute of her podcast pitching her 5-day challenge.
I love having conversations like this one today, every once in a while on the podcast, and it's great to connect with an old friend and someone I find really interesting. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and today we're talking with James Newcomb of the Musicpreneur podcast. He's been on my show. I've been on his. He invited me to come on, and we just had an off-the-cuff conversation about what it's like working on a podcast behind the scenes, the business behind podcasting, our respective businesses, what we've learned in the process, mindset, many other things. And James said, hey, you want the files for your show? And I said, heck yeah. So this is from James's show, and definitely check it out. He has revived it after a hiatus, and I'm always interested in how he approaches his show. So I hope you enjoy this. Musicpreneur.com is the website for him. And a quick shout out to our sponsors for this episode. They are Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, Practisma, and Modacity. You'll be hearing more about them later, but let's dive into this conversation with James Newcomb. Cool. Yeah, what's up with you, man? Thank you so much for giving me a ring like a month ago or so.
Man, that was so cool.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I was coming home from Trader Joe's and I saw your name pop up, and it was serendipity for sure.
Well, I mean that's just how the beauty of podcasting is. Like Jim Lambie, he listens to your show, and then I guess you had promoted the one that you did on you did on this show, Musicpreneur, and that's how he heard of me, and it turns out he lives like 15 minutes away.
It's so crazy how that works. I mean, I had a similar experience with this practice app that I use, Modacity. Someone reached out to me from Modacity, and I did a little research, and I realized they are literally on the same street that I live on.
Wow. So
one thing led to another, and I've become friends with the founder. I mean, he's a super interesting guy, and we hang out, and it's so funny what a small world it is.
I remember.
Yeah.
Well, I was just saying, I remember when I lived in Hawaii. When I first got married in 2006, I took a job as a tour guide, right? Because that's what you do when you move to Hawaii, you become a tour guide, because I was just like the expert. That's a funny story in and of itself. So I'm doing this tour at Pearl Harbor, the memorial at Pearl Harbor, and I'm leading this tour, and then I hear this guy say, "Hey, young man," and I turn around, it's my first sergeant from the Army that I knew from like 1994 to 97 or something. He was in line to go in the tour right while I was there leading this. It was so crazy.
That's hilarious. It's funny. I've had more moments like that since moving to San Francisco, because the place is so small and people tend to kind of be townies and hang out here. So I've run into people I've coached at middle school, like out in the street. I used to never run into anybody in Chicago. Yeah. I mean, every once in a while I would, but I definitely have a lot more moments like that, which is kind of nice. It feels a little bit more like a community, a crazy community, but a community.
What do you mean San Francisco is small?
Well, geographically, it's pretty small, and the population, it's about 850,000 people, which seems big, but compared to Chicago is like 2.5 million, and then Chicago is 25 miles long from top to bottom. Yeah. This is it's just a tiny town, and it's a very neighborhoody sort of place. People tend to hang out in their neighborhood, so I run into the same people over and over much more frequently than back in Chicago.
Yeah, it's so funny how things work out like that. Well, anyway, we're talking about Jim Lambie, and who I'm sure is listening to this, and he's actually thinking of getting into podcasting.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So we had a little conversation over a beer and some fish tacos the other night, and we're just, why not? He's thinking about it. He's a very, very introspective person. Mm-hmm. He mentioned a lot of like conscious of the ego. And so it's interesting because he's a bass player, and I'm just kind of trying to think, how could that translate into a podcast? Because like when you do a podcast, you want to take your strengths and like you want to take the things that really interest you, that really drive you on the inside, and that should be your message. You can't just be, not everybody can have a show just for bassists like yours.
Right.
And so I've just been thinking, what angle would he take with something like that? Because you just want to focus on what's important to you, because that's what makes a podcast unique.
Right. I would have no idea how to advise someone starting a podcast right at this moment, just because like my journey has been so just unintentional, I guess. And it's really been, I mean, it's sort of a joke that my podcast is called Contrabass Conversations, because I do talk generally to bassists, but I have no plan. I had 2 singers on the other day, and we were talking about if anyone should go to music school. I've had Jason Haheim, the principal timpanist from the Met, on a whole bunch of times. So I guess I've sort of thought I am a bass player and I'm interested in stuff, and come on my journey with me. And there will be bass in a lot of, and the funny thing is how often bass pops up, even when I'm talking to someone that I don't think has bass in the background at all. Like these 2 singers, I was interviewing. One of them, her dad is this famous bass luthier who I've had on the podcast. I had no idea. So it's just, it's tough though, because you don't want to. It's a tricky thing to think about. But getting started and just putting something out on a regular basis, even if the vision changes. That's, as you're well familiar with. Yes. These platforms are more flexible than you might think. You can always change the name. You can always pivot.
And what I've discovered is that people aren't really interested in the topic so much as they are in you as the host.
Right.
Well, I was just saying, like, your audience is probably mostly made up of bassists, but they don't listen to the show because they're interested in the bass as much as they are in you.
Right. You become the main character of your podcast. That's the way I like to talk about it. Like it's a cool medium because it's a great personal development thing. I've talked about this a lot on my show. But it's something I would want to be doing anyway with my time, sitting down, turning off my devices, and just actually connecting with someone one-on-one for an extended period of time. That's a beautiful thing at any point, but especially in the age of Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and just constant distraction. And so I learn a ton in the process. And you have just what you were describing, I think is the case. I feel the same way with the people that I listen to. I feel like I know them well. And it's funny when people meet me in real life, my wife has noticed. They start talking to me like I'm their best friend. and which I love. It's a really fun. If you get a successful podcast, you oftentimes, I think, you get this really comfortable level of quote unquote internet fame. It's like the best kind where like no one's going to notice you at the grocery store, but sometimes they might, and they'll just come up and say like, "Thank you for what you do." It's a very and if you're at a conference related to your thing, you probably get more interactions like that. But I find it to be I think being too prominent can have a whole lot of disadvantages just for practicality of your life.
Have you ever heard of F. Murray Abraham? He played
of course.
He played Salieri and Amadeus, and I think he was in Scarface. Anyway, pretty well accomplished actor. I remember him. I saw an interview with him on some entertainment show, and he said that he kind of likes his status. Like he can go on the subway in New York City, and nobody recognizes him, but he's still a very well accomplished actor.
Yeah, that's the right level. Like Jerry Seinfeld would have a little bit more problems, Jimmy Kimmel or whoever. But that's a good place to be.
Yeah, I was writing. I'm actually writing an ebook called Podcasting Principles, and so all this stuff is on my mind right now. And I was writing this morning about people, because I've been coaching a lot of podcasters the last few months, and it's great. And you get a lot of material when you talk to people who are just brand new, and they're going through all the same things that probably you did and I did back when we were starting. And I hear a lot of people say like, man, there's just so many podcasts out there. Why should I start? There's just, you go to Apple and any category that I think that my show, if I pursue it, might fall in, and there's like 1,000. Why? There's so much competition. Why should I start it? And I just think, man, if you take that mentality, you might as well just say, well, there's 8 billion people in the world. Why should he have your own child?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Right.
Go ahead.
Oh no, the only thing to really think about is that you are the biggest obstacle to getting something out there. It's not there. I don't think of competition at all, like in terms of that. In fact, I think that if we just think about podcasting, people who listen to podcasts often listen to a lot of podcasts, and they're pining for another one on a similar topic. So even if you look up in the Apple Podcast directory or wherever, and you see something similar to what you're thinking of, you're still you. You're still going to have your perspective, and in fact, people who like this probably like that. You might even think of it as a sign that you're on the right direction if you're seeing people are thinking about that. It's so interesting though to see all people launching new podcasts, and I'm on episode 750 or something ridiculous, like that. 13 years of it, and so it's really interesting to see people that are launching things in 2020. And I've seen a lot of musicians start to do that as work has evaporated and they're sitting at home and practicing for the audition that may never happen, or certainly not for the next few years. And so it's really interesting to listen to people and the approach they take. And what I love about what you do and have always done is everything you do just feels authentic. It feels real. Like I'm assuming we're going at this point because we hit the button and go. And that's the way you and I have always connected. Mm-hmm. And I'd encourage people, if anyone's launching something or thinking about that, just don't worry maybe so much about having the perfect intro or music or introducing your guest in a certain way or that sort of thing. I think just connecting with someone like a human being, that's the beautiful thing about this medium. And it's so interesting to me to listen to a few people that have launched something recently, and they give like an 8-minute, very formal introduction to the person, and then that sort of vibe kind of continues, where you and I, we just popped on and we're talking like we were just hanging out not too long ago. And I think that authenticity, I like to think that resonates with people.
This episode is brought to you by Trumpet Labs. They make hand-built mics out of Portland, Oregon, and they have an excellent mic for upright bass called Nadine. The Nadine is a condenser mic with a clear, natural sound and incredible feedback rejection. This mic is a completely new design. The head mounts in between the strings above the tailpiece with a rubber grommet, and the body securely straps to the tailpiece with Velcro elastic. A 14-inch Mogami cable connects the two parts, making it easy to place on any bass. It's durable and holds up to the demanding needs of the instrument while offering excellent sound quality. Trumpet Labs is offering a free t-shirt just for Contrabass Conversations listeners with the purchase of a mic. Just visit www.eartrumpetlabs.com/contrabass to claim yours and check out the Nadine. People have been saying such great things about my course with Discover Double Bass Beginner's Classical Bass. Here is Nicholas Walker, professor of double bass at Ithaca College and past president of the International Society of Bassists. Nicholas writes, Jason draws from this vast network with his contagious enthusiasm and love of learning. Presented through the beautifully organized and easily accessible framework of Discover Double Bass, this is a terrific learning experience for any beginner, as well as a great model for any new teacher. I am blushing, Nicholas. Thank you so much. I'm just so thrilled with how this course came out. Jeff Chalmers and the whole team at Discover Double Bass are so professional. It was such a great experience, and it was the best representation of what I would love to take every single beginner through in terms of format and presentation, and I'm just so happy that it's out there. You can learn more. We've got a link in the show notes, or you can just visit discoverdouble.com/Jason Heath.
Yeah, and the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think people think they look at like a James Altucher, who's before he even had a podcast, he was blogging and he had a huge following. And when he started his podcast, he probably had, let's just say he had like 30,000 downloads his first day. But he already had a following. And people think, well, they're comparing themselves to these superstars, or at least in our world, they're superstars. And they think, well, if I'm not going to be like that, then why try? And they forget, they didn't start out like that. Ben Greenfield started out with like just talking into his microphone, talking about little things to 10 people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and James Altucher is a great example because there's somebody who shows up regularly.
Yeah.
You want to talk about somebody who shows up regularly and somebody who has reinvented himself and the way he communicates so many times over the years. And, he'll do something that goes totally viral, like Choose Yourself, his book is a great example. And then, of course, he wrote this article called New York City is Dead. Here's Why, which is the greatest title ever. I want to steal that title for other things.
Was that a book or a blog?
No, it was a blog post that blew up, and the mayor of New York was talking about it, and everybody was condemning. It was particularly well written because it just sort of demonstrated the challenge of New York City in particular, big cities in general, in 2020 and beyond. And it caused such a controversy that Jerry Seinfeld wrote a response condemning it. And James Altucher, he runs a comedy club. He's a comedian. He's a fan of comedy, and to have somebody the stature of Jerry Seinfeld, dumping on you, I think it was in the New York Times, but then, so it was just interesting to watch him handle that. And there's somebody, if someone's thinking about or feeling like they're suffering from imposter syndrome or having a hard time getting stuff out the door, just look at that guy and how he just lets it all loose, and talk about someone who feels very authentic. I mean, he's a great example.
I think I heard something about the little spat with Seinfeld, and I think I must have been listening to some podcast. Like the last couple of days I heard about this, and Altucher was like, well, you're Jerry Seinfeld. You're not hurting for money. I am. Yeah. And people that I know, I'm watching people whose lives they're being completely transformed forever.
Right.
Who are you? Who do you think you are, Seinfeld? Yeah. I don't think he's that funny anyway, honestly, Seinfeld.
Yeah, I thought it was really weird to whatever special I saw of him actually doing comedy. He's one of the comedians that has no problem recycling his old bits, which has really fallen out of fashion in the world of comedy. And it's a little bit strange to hear stuff that you've heard so many times, from like it feels like it just feels a little bit like an old school approach to comedy. But yeah, Altucher is a really interesting person. And I think a good person to just think about how he does what he does, because he wasn't intending that piece to blow up. That was one of probably dozens of things he's written in a similar vein. And I never know what's going to, quote unquote, blow up in terms of whatever medium I'm working in. I've been doing a lot more on YouTube the last couple of years. I have some things that have gotten 25,000 views in the last few months. And then I had something that I put my heart and soul in, and it gets like 200 views. And I don't really care, because I am the limiting factor, and my imagination and my skills. And the only way I'm going to get better at anything is to just do it, whether it's practicing a passage.
This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software by Steinberg. And here is Senior Product Manager Daniel Spreadbury on the challenges of designing music notation software.
I think one of the things about a music notation software is that it does so many jobs to do, because it's serving such a wide range of users. Whether you're a high school teacher, or you're a student, or you're a composer doing concert music, or you're doing a jazz chart, or you're doing movie music, or you're doing an audio mock-up for a job, or a music -1 rehearsal track for your ensemble, or whatever it is. The jobs to be done, they cross, this enormous horizon.
I am a huge fan of Dorico. I use it every single day. There's a free version you can check out that lets you do practically everything to 2 parts. So if you're doing exercises or bass duets or anything like that, that will meet your needs, and you can check out the other options as well. Dorico.com will take you there, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Every day when I sit down to practice, I get out my phone and I boot up Modacity, which is my practicing companion, and I have a specific routine I go through. And here is Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what he does each day with Modacity.
What I do when I load Modacity every day is, if I don't have a playlist constructed already, what I do is I go in and I think, how long do I have to practice right now? Okay, I've got 40 minutes. Cool, I'm going to do 5 minutes on meditation, get my body state right. I'm going to do scales for 5 minutes, and I'm going to visualize, and I'm going to do this piece that I'm working on. You just set it up, see the budget, and follow the budget effortlessly by delegating that to the phone.
Letting my phone do all those logging details has been so great for my practicing. I can't recommend this app highly enough. Love it, love it, love it. Learn more at modacity.co, and we have a special offer if you go to our site for lifetime access to this app. It's so cool. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity.
Yeah, I like to just encourage people. This podcast is your baby. Treat it like it's your baby. Give it the same attention you would your own child. Maybe not the same attention, obviously, but it's just an outgrowth of you. It's an extension of you. It's kind of an amplification of who you are, kind of like your kids are.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. It's I definitely feel like that more and more. I forget what I talk about on the podcast versus what I talk about with my wife or with or I just it would be impossible for me to be a liar because I would not be able to keep track of my own lies. But on the podcast, I just say exactly what I'm thinking at any time, and then I don't run into any issues because if I said it, I must have been thinking it. And I think I've probably become. I like to think I've become a little more authentic in my approach over the years. Not that I was trying to not be authentic early on, but I was really trying to frame it. Like, here's my show, and we're going to go in this format, and we're going to cover this, and that's how it's going to be. We're going back to like 2007, 2008 at this point. Yeah. But in more recent years, there's no agenda. There's no anything. It's just two people hanging out over a cup of coffee or a beer, and that's the way I like to do it.
All right, let me ask you something, because you've been doing this for a long time. And I want to ask you, what do you think of the concept of a podcaster being an entertainer? What is your first reaction to that?
My first reaction is that you are an entertainer. I think that you're an entertainer if you are working in YouTube. I'm an entertainer as a teacher. I like to think I am. I hope I'm being at least somewhat entertaining. So I embrace that word. I think that's. I have no problem with that word.
Okay. Okay. Let's, on the level of importance for your podcast, where does entertainment fall?
I'm never trying to. I'm never intentionally trying to be entertaining. I like to think, but I also I have let the little like quirky aspects of my personality. I have become increasingly comfortable with putting those out online, and I've been thinking about that for a long time. I got a lot of attention back in the mid 2000s when I put out a blog post called "My Car Caught Fire and Exploded," where I drew stick figure renditions of my car catching fire and me pulling the bass out and the police putting me over the hood and searching me for weapons, which they 100% did. And so I have now I didn't say I'm going to try to make something funny. It was just one of those things that was like, I didn't have any photos from that event, the exploding car. So I thought, and I'm a terrible artist, so let's just embrace the badness of my artistry and put these things up.
Well, how do you define being entertaining? What does that mean to you?
I think probably it's being, yeah, that's a good question. How do you define, entertaining and engaging are pretty similar words in my vocabulary. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Entertainer is a weird word. It almost feels kind of like, again, like an old school word. Like I think of Vegas or something like that and the Rat Pack. Right. But I think being entertaining and being engaged, I think there's definitely a lot of overlap in terms of those. So I haven't really thought much about that. That's a good topic for pondering.
Well, I've been pondering it a lot because it's part of my new ebook that's coming out soon.
Well, what are your thoughts on entertainment and the role of a podcaster?
Well, the way that I have begun to view entertainment, I take the word entertainment and I just substitute it for not boring. Mm-hmm. Okay? So it's like, because my wife and I, Sana, we just talked about this on our own podcast this past weekend. And I just asked her, Sana, what word comes to your mind when you hear the word entertainment? And she said, circus, stand-up comedian, just like you said, Las Vegas and the dive bar, whatever, cheap entertainment. And I've come to realize that entertainment just means you're keeping someone's attention. Mm-hmm. Like Breaking Bad is my favorite show of all time. And it's hugely entertaining. But to say that it's funny would be... they use humor to kind of bring things down to earth because if there was no humor at all, it'd be completely unwatchable because it's so dark and so heavy. But the whole show is unbelievably gripping, especially the first time watching it. It's so captivating. And that's how I've come to view entertainment. It's just being unpredictable, being maybe embracing something that's a little bit controversial, that's going to ruffle some feathers a little bit. That's entertainment. And people hear that word entertainment and they just have this cognitive dissonance because they think, well, I'm doing this show that's like focused on entrepreneurship for musicians, and I can't be entertaining. That it doesn't jive with them. But what they could stand to, an idea that they could embrace is your job is to keep people's attention, and whatever you use the tools that you have. If it's comedy, great. If it's humor, if you've got a sense of humor, great. But just treat it as a tool, not something that you have to do because people listening to you, they only have a 15-second attention span. And, well, you got to go to the next joke and the next cheap joke. Otherwise, you're going to lose their attention. People, we've been on the call, for 21 minutes, and people have been listening, and it feels like 2 minutes have passed. So this is entertainment for me.
Right. Yeah. And entertainment doesn't necessarily mean cracking jokes. Just like you're saying, like I am particularly not good at I've never tried to be good at that. But I love that you bring up Breaking Bad. I was literally watching Breaking Bad this morning. So I kind of go through that show. That's one of those shows I've probably gone through the entire thing 5 times.
Me too.
And it still captivates me. Yes. I know exactly what's going to happen, and I still can't believe that X, Y, or Z happens. And yes, there's humor sprinkled into that show, and it helps kind of certainly. I mean, what a brilliant person Vince Gilligan is, just putting that show together. And the more, it's funny, when I first watched that show, I had this feeling like they weren't expecting to go as many seasons as they did, and they were kind of making up the story as they went. As I watched it more times, I could see all the foreshadowing that even the first few episodes had on the rest of the season. So I don't know. I do know that Jesse Pinkman was originally going to be eliminated early on, and then they decided to keep him. But the cohesion of that show over the seasons is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Well, I think the most foreshadowing really began in season 2. Mm-hmm. That's when things really like they were kind of knew they had a seat at the table with AMC, and I think, because I've listened to all the podcasts, because they have all these insider podcasts that are hosted by Vince Gilligan, and they said, I got the impression that like season 2 they knew they had that longevity, and then they could really plan. Season 1 was a little kind of discombobulated, and they managed to take what they had and work it into like season 2 on, but that's when it really began to become what it was.
That's interesting. You've given me some more podcasts to listen to, because I haven't gone down the rabbit hole of that, but I need to. I'll go subscribe after we get off today.
There is so much value for a content creator just to listen to those podcasts, and the attention to detail, the just meticulousness of those shows that they put into it. It's just unbelievable. How high quality and so detail oriented.
Have you gone through Apple Podcasts or whatever app you use for podcasts? I use Overcast these days, but have you gone through and taken a look at how many podcasts you subscribe to recently? I'd just be curious what.
I don't even shop anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, if there's one that I want to look up, then I'll do a search for it, but I don't browse through them.
I have. It's an astonishing amount. I don't know. It's well over 100 certainly that I subscribe to, and I kind of have. Overcast lets me filter. I have the list I call my favorites, which are the ones that I want to dip into pretty much every episode. And then I have all episodes. But honestly, I open up all episodes a lot of the time, and I find a show I hadn't listened to for a year, and I listen to another episode. And I just like that diversity of topic, I find podcasts from other podcasts or from newsletters that I subscribe to. And it's just so interesting, the almost infinite approaches that there are to this medium. It's such a flexible medium.
It is.
you and I are here talking. The interview medium is wonderful and tried and true, and I use that a lot. I've had podcasts that I've done in the past on a specific topic where I've had people call into a Google Voice number and leave messages. I've done greatest hits. I've gone through years of content and synthesized things that were being talked about 13 years ago with something that was happening 6 months ago. It's a really and watching people like Tim Ferriss and other people explore different ways to use this medium. It's a cool medium. It can be 3 hours long, like a typical Joe Rogan episode. It can be 5 minutes long. It can be anywhere in between. It can be total chaos. It can be tightly scripted. It can have music. It can not have music. It's an incredible medium.
Yeah, it's not like you're worried about, okay, this has to be 42 minutes and 13 seconds for an hour long time slot on the channel, and then they account for commercials, and then you're either scrambling to either cut stuff that it's painful cuts, or you're just like filling time just to meet that. And it's not to say that podcasters never kill time. There's plenty of that going on.
I've been thinking a lot about sponsorship in podcasts recently, and I've had a wide variety of sponsors over the years. And then COVID hit, and one sponsor pulled out right away, and then D'Addario Strings, who I've worked with for years, they eliminated the position of the person I'd been working with. So I thought, all right, now is not an ideal time for so I fired them before they could fire me. Essentially, I just emailed everybody and said, let's just halt sponsorship for a while, and I ran for about 4 or 5 months with 0 sponsors, and I am now working with a few again, and I will continue if it's the right fit to work with people. I have no problem with that. I've decided that that's a good route for me, but it was so refreshing also to not have any to be totally untethered in that way. And I have now, and increasingly I have some products of my own that it makes more sense to use the podcast as a vehicle for that. And then I look at other people that use Patreon, which I have resisted for my podcast for probably irrational reasons. And I just like monetizing this thing that you and I both do. I know you've thought a lot about that, but what are your thoughts on either sponsorship or monetization in general, or marketing your own thing versus I'm sure you've got thoughts on the topic.
Well, honestly, and this is like shame on me. I don't know if it's shame on me or what, but I haven't grown a show to the point where I'd be in a position to even approach a sponsor. However, my thoughts on it is that if you have if you bring a third party into anything, you're sort of diluting your brand. And I don't know that diluting is the right word, but you're sort of compromising your own brand. And I think that if you're going to bring on a sponsor, you have to be very clear with that person or that company or whatever it is, and say, this is who I am. This is what this show is about. You might find something that's objectionable. You have to be prepared for that. Like, I'm not your servant. I'm not going to cater. I'm not going to change my message in the event that you get offended at something I say, or you find something that I say objectionable. This is my show, and those are my rules. If you can take it or leave it.
Yeah. And I think so many people come into podcasts and maybe they've listened to a lot of podcasts and they hear sponsor reads, whether it's Squarespace or whatever. And I would just encourage anybody, don't put that, leave that for later. That is just, you're like,
exactly.
Get good at what you do. And the first thing, as you start to think about monetizing and making this a sustainable thing, because if it's not monetized in some way, there's so many things we can pay attention to in life. It's very easy for the podcast to fall off the priority list. Get good at what you do, get consistent, and I would encourage people to think about whether it's a digital product or coaching service or even teaching lessons, if we're talking to musicians or what have you. That's a very clear because just like you're saying, you introduce a third party. What you're doing with sponsorship is you're kind of saying, hey, go look at this other stuff. You're on my show, but go look at these other things. Having said that, so many podcasts and YouTube channels, whatever, work with sponsors. It definitely, me included, it definitely can make sense in your suite of monetization. But I would say just don't even think about it for a while for most people.
Yeah, I think the threshold is like if you have regularly over 1,000 downloads per episode, then you might be able to approach someone.
Yeah, and it depends on how niche or however we want to use the word, down you are too.
That's true.
You know, like I have a show, though I just said I talk about all sorts of things besides bass. It's a fair bet that the majority of people listening are bass players or are bass parents or whatever. So it makes a lot of sense for a string company to market their bass or rosin or something targeted to even musicians. It's a little tougher if it's the wider your scope, the tougher something like that can be.
So are you talking about people who they want to start a podcast and they're like, well, I have to have a sponsor? Because I hear that a lot. Because I talk to people who they want to start a podcast and they're like, well, it's required that I have a sponsor because Tim Ferriss has sponsors. So I have to have them.
Right. That's a very tough sell unless you are extremely well known, because you're saying, hey, here's this idea I have that does not exist. Do you want to pay me money to make this thing? It's much easier to say, hey, I made this and I have these people on this journey with me. And if you can demonstrate it in some way, that's even better in terms of metrics, which can be a challenge of podcasting. That's a much easier sell. Get going. There's nothing to sponsor yet. You know, so that would be my recommendation.
Well, that's sort of the idea behind crowdfunding, Kickstarter, is you have your idea, fund it, and then I can make it.
Yeah. So, and again, that there's a great example. So that might be a good model for that's a good example. And I'm changing my mind on these sort of topics all the time. I think it's really interesting. One thing that I have not embraced is the Patreon model for my podcast. I just don't. And I know a lot of creators use Patreon or a similar service, generally Patreon though. And I think that there's something to be said for that and for that model. I don't know. It's just I decided a few years ago I'm either going to have sponsors or send people to some product I have, or have none of that and just have it be a community funded thing. But I just don't want to. There's some ratio of paid content or asking people for money that I just feels off if I threw yet another thing into the mix. And podcasters that have Patreon, and this is no disrespect to those people, it's great, and some people are doing a good job with it, they seem to spend such a giant percentage of their show talking about their Patreon that I'm like hitting the 30-second forward button a lot. So
I heard this podcast the other day. The thing is 18 minutes long. And this person is doing some sort of 5-day challenge to add email subscribers, and she spent the first minute of her podcast pitching her 5-day challenge, the last minute of her podcast pitching her 5-day challenge, and then there was a mid-roll commercial pitching the 5-day challenge. So it's like out of 18 minutes, like 5 minutes of it was spent pitching her challenge, and I was. Why are you doing this? You're not sharing anything of any real value.
Yeah, that it's such a tough thing, and there's so many different approaches, and that seems the ratio seems a bit off on that. Yeah. Probably 4 years ago, I fell into this format, good or bad, it's just what I do of taking a quote from, if I'm doing an interview show, taking a quote that sounds at least somewhat interesting, putting it at the front, and then I do an intro. And the reason I stole it from a bunch of podcasts, so that's the short answer. But I do think there's something, if you're doing an interview show, a lot of people, eventually they're coming because I'm the main character, but at first they're probably coming because that person's interesting to them. So to have the first thing they do, they hit play and they hear that person saying something interesting, I think that there's something compelling about that. Yeah. And then they hear me and my spiel, and that's any sort of talking about anything I'm doing that you could trade money for or send them to a sponsor, that happens into the episode. But everybody's got a different format. Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss, they read ads for anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes at the beginning. But the cool thing is with Joe Rogan, after that, there are 0 ads, and you just sink into the conversation. So different ways to skin this thing.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, because if you want to monetize your show, you can't just overtly you can't turn it into like this infomercial every single time for stuff you're pitching. I think the best thing that I've heard and the most effective calls to action that I've heard and that I've been like taught in blogs and books I've read on this is make your call to action kind of like a PS to a letter. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm signing off. Oh, by the way, PS, I have this for sale. You might want to check it out.
Yeah.
I've been trying out this string for my bass, and I thought I like it. I thought you might like it too. By the way, signing out. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Check it out.
That's a good way to do it. That's a good way. I picked from somewhere I read or listened to or whatever. My pitch these days generally has been join my email newsletter, and then I'll sell you on that through whatever tagging and metrics I use for ConvertKit, the program I use, and that seems to have been working. Messages that I want my true fans to hear, I always put at the end, because if you got to the end of whoever and you're still listening, you're either tied and gagged in some, and you can't escape and turn off the podcast, or you're into the podcast.
Yeah.
So but it's an interesting medium. When I tried the hardest to monetize is when my numbers ended up growing the least, which was early 2017, and I was thinking I gotta make I'm watching the bank account go down, and I've got to figure out how to make this profitable. And when I quit worrying so much about that and just like played around and had a good time and wasn't obsessed with like how I'm doing week over week in the numbers, checked in more infrequently, things started to grow. So that's interesting. It could just be me, but I was really trying to get people to donate, buy my book. I had put out a book about auditioning at the time, self-published, invite me to your event. Nobody ever invited me to their event when I was doing that. All sorts of people invited me to their event after I quit pushing it so hard, which is hilarious.
It seems like people would get the impression that the only motivation that you have to do your show is to sell your stuff.
Yeah, and I probably had some desperation creeping into what I was doing,
Right.
and legitimate desperation, because I decided I'm gonna make this my thing, and then there's just a lag between that decision and profitability. Certainly for anything that I've experienced entrepreneurially, and so if you're starting out a podcast, I would not expect to be in the black with that podcast for some time. But if you think of it as an investment, it has absolutely been an investment for me. But I remember some of those hard decisions, like, oh, am I going to plunk down $350 for lead pages? I'm going to start paying whatever for my email provider and level up, and those things have paid off. But it's a long game. I think most podcasters are playing.
I was just thinking about, we talked about having children and how your podcast is like having a child, and those diapers aren't cheap. They don't give them away at Walmart. It costs money to raise a child, and it costs money. And the child's not going to. My son, he's not going to bring any money into the house. I'm certainly never going to expect him to contribute to the household expenses. It's not like I'm investing in him so that he can like give a monetary payout someday. It's nothing like that. And you invest your time and your energy, your bandwidth into your show because not for the money, because of some other reward. And if you put yourself in a position to be able to make some money with it, great. Awesome. Good for you. Do it the right way. But when you get to that point, if you've done it the right way, you'll know whether or not that thing is the right fit for you. But if you're like, think I have to make money with this right away, man, it's a hard road if you stay on it longer than 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think of it as skill development rather than something that's going to make money immediately. It's helpful for me just because I'm developing these skills through doing this podcast. Mm-hmm. Through doing that, I'm also developing a set of skills that can be repurposed in a variety of ways. Now I know how to edit audio. Now I know how to talk without saying so many ums and ahs. I say more than I want now, but way less than I did before I started podcasting. Now I know how to use Adobe Creative Cloud products, or
or now I know how to tune up an image or make an image that people click on versus one that they don't. I mean, these are all things that you're developing a really interesting set of skills by actually creating a show, being the producer of your show, being the host of the show, being the marketer of the show. I have used that in a variety of ways through consulting gigs, through other projects. You're developing extremely valuable skills that can be used in all different kinds of ways.
You know, I think my route to making podcasting a career has been, not that there's a conventional way to do it, but I think the route that I took, and it wasn't really my intention to take it when I first started out, but the way that it ended up working out is that I had my show Musicpreneur, and it was going okay, but it wasn't great. You know, I was honestly getting a little burnt out with it because it just wasn't producing the way that I thought it would, or the way that I thought it should. And so I ended up taking a gig with Ben Greenfield, who's really, really well known in the health and fitness industry. And I just, looking back at the whole experience, I felt like Daniel on The Karate Kid. And I'm serious. It's like you have the wax on, wax off, paint the fence, sand the floor. And here I am. All this time I'm like dictating, taking little shorthand notes on the interviews and put them on the show notes, learning. And I'm learning these skills and that I already had, but I was getting just really, really good at it. And so serendipity comes. He and I reached kind of an agreement on a service that I did for him outside of the podcast. And the terms that we agreed on was he would promote my services as a podcast editor on his show. And it was through that just in the last 6 or 8 weeks, I've taken on just extremely high quality clients. I mean, really, really high quality leads. And now just several weeks into it, they're becoming friends, almost like family. It's just really, really neat community that Sana and I are building with this. And all I can say, man, is just like, you just never know what's going to happen if you take that step. And it's not like my dream is to edit Ben Greenfield's show forever. It's not what I want to do when I hang up my spikes for forever. But just that one little thing turned into something really cool.
Well, congratulations. That's great to hear. And you know, the interesting thing, a takeaway from that journey for people might be, you could probably write out that journey in your biography and it would sound neat and tidy, but it probably felt like total chaos when you were doing it. You had no idea X, Y, or Z would happen, you know, and I think it's so easy to put someone who's found success in any field kind of on a pedestal and to think, oh, well, they had all these advantages or things just worked out, or isn't it great how that worked out? But that person, when they're in the moment, it was not like that. The path was unclear. You try something, it didn't work. Oh, all of a sudden this kind of worked, but maybe it didn't. But that worked, but I don't want to do that anymore. So it's a very that's true if you're taking auditions, or that's true even if you're in a more conventional field of employment, you know, whatever that means. But that's certainly the case. Like my career, I have what I consider because of my podcast career that's worked out pretty well, but it was totally bananas how it worked out. It was, And when I really tried to make it work was that early 2017, like I was telling you about, and nothing was working, you know, and I was spending oodles of money and nobody wanted me to do anything for them, and people didn't want to advertise, and I just felt like but I just kind of kept kicking the tires and looking for different opportunities, and then all of a sudden something leads to something, and you get some momentum.
Yeah. That's so cool. I was about to say something, and it just completely.
Oh no! I'm sorry.
Well, I tell you what, man. I mean, you have a student coming up, and can you believe we've been going for 45 minutes already?
Well, I'm not. I looking at the time. That is true, but that's always the way it is when we chat. So I love what you do, and I always enjoy the opportunity to chat with you on the air, off the air, about any variety of topics, and it's fun. We need no script. We need nothing. Whatever we'll talk about will certainly be of interest to us, and hopefully to others as well.
Well, we were entertained. I don't know about anybody listening.
we were definitely entertained.
We certainly had a good time. All right.
Thanks, man. Let's do this again soon. I appreciate it.
Well, I mean, I was just like, I haven't done anything for Musicpreneur in so long because I've been so busy with these guys. Mm-hmm. And I just had to do something. And we didn't even talk about music.
Yeah, that's true.
I had to do something. That's true.
Yeah, well, feel free to hit me up anytime, and I may do the same for you when I get in the weeds on some of my projects.
I mean, if you're up for it, we can do it like twice a month or something. Just to chat.
I'm down.
Just to talk.
I'm down.
Sweet.
I love it. I learn a lot talking to you. It's like just a one-on-one mastermind about all these sort of things. So sure.
Yeah, that's great.
Let's do it again soon.
Cool. Do you still keep in touch with Jennifer Rosenfeld?
I haven't recently. You two had a wonderful conversation, I believe, on your podcast or perhaps on hers. I haven't been in touch with her recently. I did actually. I got together with her a year and a half ago, just at the little cafe on in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I'm in touch with a lot of people that have worked with her through her services. Christopher Still from LA Phil. He's got Honesty Pill, a podcast and a coaching service that he puts out. And I was chatting with Chris, and I've talked to a lot of other people that have worked with her, but I haven't been in touch with her directly.
I sent her an email to her iCadenza email address. Maybe she doesn't have that anymore because she's not with them.
Yeah, I think she's moved on from there, but I'm sure that I'm sure you can get in touch with her because I know she's working with a lot of people. And if you need it, I can ask Chris or somebody else who's in touch with her.
I have her phone number. I can probably just give her a call.
I'm sure she'd love to chat.
She's not that big. She's not that big in the world.
she's not getting recognized at the supermarket yet, probably. Yeah.
All right. Well, I have like 11 hours of work ahead of me, so I got to get going. But
all right,
this was awesome, man.
This is fun. Yeah, let's do it again. I'd love to do this. Just hit me up, and we'll do it again.
Okay, sounds great.
All right,
awesome.
Take it easy.
Thanks.
All right,
see ya.
Bye.
James, thanks, man. Love chatting with you. Musicpreneur.com is the website, or just look him up in your podcast app of choice. And it's fun to hop on the line with an old friend. And I think of James as a friend. We have spent hours at this point getting to know each other. And though we have yet to meet in person, I know that day will come soon. And as I mentioned, I think in the intro of this episode, I was walking back from Trader Joe's and I saw James pop up on my phone, and I said, let me call you back in 10 minutes when I get home. And I found myself chatting, and it just feels like such a small world doing that, doing a little FaceTime with James. I have a student that I need to get on Zoom with in 22 minutes, so I must be briefer than normal. So if you are one of the few but awesome, I don't know how many people listen all the way to the end here, but if you're one of the people that likes to hear me rant and rave, not much of that this episode, I better close it out here and thank the team who are Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper. Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And the music you hear on each and every podcast in the intro and outro, it might be going right now, is by Eric Hochberg. It's Eric and I jamming out back in the early days of the podcast. He got in touch with me and he said, hey man, you need at least double basses in your intro. I had some cheesy electric bass things. So that's what that is. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.